Welcome, everyone. This is the first meeting of our Discretionary Recommendations Committee. And thank you I thank most of you individually, but this is a lot of activity in a relatively limited period of time of necessity. So I appreciate everybody being willing to take it on. And in addition to the committee members who are here, Elena is here from the Biden Institute. And we're very grateful that Nick Konzelman is here from the Office of Management and Budget, who has been incredibly helpful already in helping us put together some of these preparation materials. First thing I wanted to try to do was just to sort of review what our charge is, for this meeting specifically, and just in general. We approved at the last consortium meeting a document that had a list that we have put together over the course of over a year, of a set of potential items to be included in a final Reading Consortium plan, along with what we added at the last meeting was a list of questions that needed to get answered in terms of trying to refine some of those items, get cost estimates for them, get a better gauge of public reaction to them, all for the purpose of helping us figure out what ought to be included in a final Ready Consortium plan when the full consortium actually votes on one. So, our goal for these meetings is not to come up with final answers to whether something should be in or out, but to try to narrow the issues down enough so that we can send them off to our finance subcommittee, and they have something more concrete that they can work with to give us a range of cost estimates that we can look at. And education costs is obviously something that is on people's minds right now, so we want to be thoughtful about what we are putting forward. And then also for our community engagement subcommittee, so that we can try to get some better level of public feedback to some of these things. And all of these general categories, with the exception of one, were part of the public meetings that we already had. But I think the public feedback was sort of limited, in part because they were presented as very broad general ideas that it was sort of hard to be against. So we're hoping that if we can, be a little bit more specific about what we're talking about, that we might get some better, some more helpful public comment also. So that's kind of the goal. And you can see from the agenda, I think what we did that was helpful in this document was we laid out some pretty direct questions that we wanted to try to answer for each of the topics, and we've broken them out, one or two per meeting. So we actually have some very specific questions that are on the agenda in terms of what we are looking at tonight, which is outside school time, wraparound service programs, before school, after school, summer, the questions are on the agenda, and I don't know that we need to answer them like sequentially. I think it actually, I think it's almost helpful not to try to, because I think, the answers to some of them might impact the answers to others. So we sent out a pretty good amount of material before the meeting that had information about what's been generally successful and unsuccessful at the national level, to the extent that we have information on what we've been doing in Delaware, what the outcomes from those programs have been, all with the idea of giving us at least a little bit of factual backdrop for what we'd be talking about tonight. So I guess what I would like to do is, just from the outset, see if people had, having had hopefully the opportunity to look at some of what we had sent out before the meeting, if people just had general thoughts about um, outside school time programs, wraparound programs in elementary, middle, high schools as part of what Reading might propose. And I've got some thoughts of my own, but there are people on this committee that have a lot more direct experience than I do in schools. So I will shut up with that long prelude, but was just wanted to sort of open things very generally if folks had some initial thoughts. And like I said, I'm happy to weigh in as well.
Are we being asked, should we keep supporting it? Or
I think it's I mean, I guess one option would be for us to say we shouldn't do it at all. I think we've been operating on the assumption that we would recommend doing some type of outside of school time programming as part of the plan. But I mean, it's definitely not doing it is definitely an option.
no, I don't think that's, I personally,
Yeah.
I don't think that should be an option. I think we should see how we can get more schools involved. Because from what I experienced, I think way more schools than just, was it just two on there, right? Or is it Christina's conditional period? Three. Or is it three?
There's three that have state funds that we recommended, and then there's
Right.
a number of other schools that have federal funds.
Right. I would just see how we can spread the wealth a little bit more if we could, but other than that, that's just my opinion. Or see how we can, it could be more effective maybe, yeah, maybe the effectiveness and, definitely don't think we should take that from it.
Right.
It should be, given more, if we could.
So one thing about outside school time, so when I think about that, it's a combination of after school care
Right.
and then after school extracurricular stuff, right? And so like, are we talking about blending the two? Because providing, you have those families that need the after school care. They can't get to, pick up their child. They're not going to be at the bus stop to pick them up. So they have got to stay for an extended amount of time after the school day. And then we try to fill that time with obviously educational enrichment type of programs like clubs and things like that. But it's so the reason I asked for that distinction is because that's where you can have purchase of care can pick up part of the cost. If it's a licensed facility. So it's not going to all need to be funded by the schools or by the district. There should be other pools of money to tap into. So that was one of the things that I was just thinking about. And then also it's the structure of the after school program. So you can have organizations come in and provide that after school care, but are we holding them accountable to certain outcomes?
Right.
Are we specifically saying that there's got to be X number of instructional minutes embedded in that program? Are we putting some literacy goals around it that students have to show some type of progress in their literacy? And then we can't overlook the importance of the extracurricular stuff, the clubs and things like that. Students grow in those programs as well. But having that different structure. And so I think about, I sit on the CEB board, so the Youth Development Center that's being built and what opportunities that creates. I mean, that creates a really nice hub in the city. And how could we maybe use that as well as part of the plan?
I mean, what do the best practices look like in terms of assessing outside of school? I mean, to me, and I'm not a practitioner, so I don't know, it feels a little all over the place. I guess I don't know, are there best practices that some LEAs are using, perhaps, and when others are not, to make sure that, the right outcomes are flowing or there's the right oversight, I guess. And that is probably the question that's most interesting to me. Like, well, what is appropriate, what's already being done, what is realistic to be asking, I guess, LEAs to do.
Mhm.
And so I.
Well, that's the
have
thing.
no idea.
If you want to have it to be academic, if you want to have an academic piece to it
Mhm.
and accountability and then you want to have certified teachers staff it.
Right.
Then that becomes one of the problems, right? It
Right.
becomes an issue. So how many teachers want to stay after school in order to
I see.
support that? So
Okay.
then you start supplementing with people that are not licensed teachers. So you get college students or you get volunteers, et cetera.
Mhm.
So then you can't necessarily hold that program to the same standards because it's not a licensed teacher. The other thing too is, for parents that need their child to be in these after-school programs, you don't want that child to feel like they're just in school for an extra 2 hours. There's got to be fun.
Mhm.
So you've got to balance that. So there's got to be a portion academic, but then there's also got to be a portion that just, gives them experiences that they wouldn't have otherwise, whether it be sports, whether it be arts, whether it be STEM related. Yeah.
I think United Way has a great curriculum. It's just all about if you can get the right people to execute the curriculum, like you said.
Mhm, mhm.
A lot of your after school teachers and educators may not, like you said, be certified because let's just be honest. A lot of our teachers and support staff are just not certified, period.
Mhm.
So then you add on after school, so then that ratio is slimmer. And then you add on the fact that if you were agency worker, you're not getting paid anything extra for coming.
Mhm.
Or, you do have to be employed by United Way, so then that's a whole nother thing. But like you said, at some point, you just kind of take what you can get
Mhm.
to even have the program still
Mhm.
running.
Mhm.
So now we noticed during COVID, we didn't have a problem. That's because you got paid just out of this world. The pay was so good, it was like, what, I can't pass that up.
Mhm.
So it was good, but with structure, I think from my experience, United Way has a good way of asking for structure for aftercare. Because you do have to engage in educational activities, but they have to be engaging and they have to, and you have that person that oversees that and make sure, and I think that's where it comes in at, is to make sure that the person who oversees it knows the curriculum too, so they
Yeah.
know what to expect and what to see. So that becomes
And that's a United Way, because I guess like it's very easy for things to look awesome on paper, but like for them to be implemented with fidelity, it
Yeah.
seems to be where things often fall apart. So like, is
I
that?
mean,
there's
like
someone
I'm
who
saying,
can-
I think they do a great job with what they are given to work with.
Mhm.
Because like I said, when it comes to what they expect their aftercare educators to do is great. You have to have a certain amount of educational minutes or hours, and they need to be doing educational stuff. You just can't just have them sitting there and then they have let's play come in and do education. So they put a great effort, but I'm just saying in every school we don't get the same thing.
I guess a question would, I mean, since we're thinking about this in terms of something that would come along with a recommendation, are we, we don't want to make a recommendation that even with a dollar figure attached to it isn't attainable. Like, are we thinking about what can we recommend to be put in place to make it feasible to implement this more effectively, maybe than it already is being implemented overall across the landscape? Are there specific things that we should be speaking to or making sure
Yeah.
are being resourced? Because I guess I would hate for us to be like, every school should have this,
Yeah.
this is how much it costs, the money's going there.
Yeah.
But it's not realistic. Like there aren't actually like the qualified bodies in the world to deliver it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, the one thing that the research that we sent around seems pretty concrete about is that you're not going to get academic outcomes if you don't have certified teachers doing the instruction and you don't have a formal curriculum. And that, I mean, there's evidence of that. And then this is national, this is Delaware. And then there's evidence that if it's more like a homework club, that you don't get improved grades or test scores. You might get other stuff. I mean, you might get kids, coming to school more often or, improvements in behavior, things like that, but you don't get, you don't see movement in terms of, progress on grade point average or standardized test scores.
Mhm.
So it, in terms of, I mean, for me at least, if we're going to recommend spending a lot of money on something, then there ought to be a specific
Cool.
outcome that we're shooting for. And the one that seems like it makes the most sense to me is we want kids to do better
Yeah.
academically.
Yeah.
So that does force some choices in terms of, you can't do everything.
Sure.
Right.
So that means, more sort of instructional activity and not necessarily nothing on the other end of things, but either less of it or that the academics are somehow integrated into,
Mhm.
what the other activities are. And I don't, Stephanie?
Yes.
Still on?
Stephanie's there she is.
Yeah, I'm sorry, she's top of the
She's
screen.
right-
Tika's
Um,
also joined as
Great.
well.
Oh, cool.
Hi, Tika. I had a chance to talk to Stephanie earlier today because I was thinking about the same issues in terms of certified teacher availability.
Mhm.
And I don't know if Stephanie, if you're comfortable sort of sharing your thoughts about that.
Sure. We discussed a little bit the idea that, certified teachers, if you ask them, those who want to do the outside of school programs will be, more than happy to do it if it's not an extra burden as far as creating a curriculum and making up lesson plans. So if there's a curriculum that we're using, Haley put a really good question in the chat too about what current programs are we already using, so we can kind of like streamline what's actually working. But back to our conversation. Talking a little bit about the idea that folks are out there. We just have to give them the opportunity to sign up because some folks will be in interest of making a little bit of extra money by providing these services. The idea that certificated educators are going to be good to provide these programs, but we just have to find the ones that are interested in doing it is what we talked about. Maybe making sure that we offer it to the entire district, not just the folks that are working in those schools with those children. So if I'm working at a different school in the same district, I can come over and do the programs. We would have to figure out how that looks. But I mean, I know there are educators who are willing to work these programs, who are more than willing and be really happy to work the programs, to work with the students and to get a little more extra money. We just have to kind of make the opportunity available.
Hey, this Tika. Sorry I joined late. I'm coming from back to school night. But I have a question. What are the grade bands for this wraparound after school program?
The
For the grade bands?
Yeah, what grade?
That's,
are
I
we
think,
targeting?
part of,
That's another question.
yeah, that's part of what we need to ask the finance committee to give us estimates about, because obviously the more grades that we're talking about offering these services in,
Mhm.
the more expensive.
But I also think that's an important consideration for making sure that what we're doing is developmentally appropriate.
I mean, you definitely see a drop off in after school programs with middle school kids, unless it's sports related or performing arts related. So I was thinking K-5 was the
Yeah,
sweet spot that we were.
kind of a purchase of care, cliff.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, for camp as well, summer camp, you see the same thing.
Mhm.
Well, and then the question becomes too, if we're including K, but the configurations of all these schools are a little bit different, would that be a consideration? Like, would we want to look at 1 through 5 versus K, or include that, and then it would look different in each of our schools that had K possibly?
I'm not sure I understand.
I think.
So for instance, Stubbs is kindergarten and preschool. Harlan is K through 5th. Bayard is 1 through 8. They're not, if we did go with K through 5, it's not the same configuration in all of our buildings. So for some consistency, I wonder if that was what we were looking at, would we want to look at 1 through 5th, because all of those schools would have 1 through 5th, but not all of our schools would have kindergarten. Does that make sense?
Oh, I see what you're saying.
Mhm.
Yeah, I mean, my off the cuff thought was that we would just be doing it by school. And so, you know, if it was a school that had kindergarten, and it would include kindergarten, and if it didn't, then it wouldn't.
Mhm. Mhm.
Do all these schools currently have those programs?
No.
Okay.
Or at least, I don't think so.
And are we just talking about schools within the city of Wilmington? Because we haven't really been explicit about that. I feel like that's kind of what we're sort of talking about, the Reading schools, that we would consider the Reading schools, which are within the geographic. Is that what everybody's thinking about? Or are we, or not?
I think that's also I mean, I'll tell you one other thing I was thinking about, maybe my statement that we shouldn't do things in order was actually a bad suggestion, but we'll see. I mean, there's 31 schools right now that DOE has labeled as high need schools
Okay.
statewide, and they have some kind of calculus that you have to be in the top quartile in 3 out of 4 categories for percentage of students that are low income, English language learner.
Mhm.
I had them written down here, students with disabilities, or they have a 4th category, which is percentage of underrepresented minority students, or the school has more than 90% of the students in one of those previous 3 categories.
Mhm.
So instead of being in the top quartile, that they're in the top.
So it's like a
10%.
concentration factor.
Yeah. So there's 31 schools statewide. 28 of them are in northern Newcastle County, and 3 of them are at Kenton, Sussex. And 8 of them are charter schools. All northern Newcastle County. I don't remember how many of them are high schools, but I think it's a very small number. Like 1 or 2 that are high schools, and I think a small number of middle schools also. I think it's primarily elementary schools. So that's at least a universe of schools that we can
Right.
talk about, and you know, we could say, do we want it just the 28 that are northern Newcastle County, or do we want to include 3 that
Okay.
are
I see.
downstate, or do we want to include only K to, you know, elementary school, high need schools? But that's at least sort of a defined universe
Well, I guess I
of
would
schools.
say, if this is something that's attached to a redistricting proposal, it makes sense for it to be everything within the map of what we're recommend, the participating districts area, right? To me, that's what makes sense to me, that we would be making a recommendation specifically for, perhaps it's those high needs identified schools within whatever that ultimate map looks
Yeah.
like. That's my instinct anyway. So just putting that out there, just in terms of narrowing down on what is the set of schools and how many that might be, that could, depending on the 3, different options we're looking at, that could be a different number.
Yeah.
Each time, obviously. But
Well, I guess part of the challenge with that also, just timing wise, is that we're not sure yet which schools are going to be in whatever plan that we recommend.
well, I mean, I think the buildings aren't going anywhere. I think if you look at the map, you can see how many, we're just talking about high needs elementary schools, right? I guess you could kind of estimate how many of those currently exist within that geographic area. Does that make sense? I don't know if I said that right.
I mean, we still have one plan on the table that would be all 4,
Districts,
right?
yes,
So there's a couple schools, I think, that on that high needs list that are Newark.
Yeah.
Schools
Yeah,
that wouldn't be in the other 2.
exactly.
So that's what I was
So
saying.
it's like a
was-
marginal difference? Or-
Yeah.
Yeah.
But
I
most
mean,
of
but
them
it'd be
are the-
easy to cost out the 3, right? If
Yeah.
you look at the map and say how many of these buildings are in this space that are currently on that list.
Right.
Just thinking in terms of a scope for costing out.
Yeah.
If we were to say every school with anything within the K-5 band and high needs and within whatever the redistricted region would be, would fall into we would whatever, recommend that there be full outside school time
Mhm.
services provided at those buildings.
And we can ask them to, we can ask the finance subcommittee to, I mean, we're not just asking them for one number.
Yeah.
So we can say, can you give us a number for if it's this set of schools or?
Yeah.
So I was just throwing that out there just in terms of like the maximum universe probably that we would want to be
Okay,
talking about.
yeah. I feel like that's probably one of the easier things for us to hone in on. I don't know if anyone else knock that, knock that question. I'm trying to start
Yeah.
getting questions off our list.
Mhm.
But how is, what's the term that the department uses for those?
I need
schools?
schools.
High needs.
Yeah.
schools.
And I don't know where, I'm sure it's part of some state or federal program or Nick, I don't, you know why we came up with that term?
I'm not sure where it originated
Yeah.
from, but I would imagine it ties back to federal
Okay.
Okay.
regulations, settlement funding or something like that, right?
I mentioned that only because if it's associated with some program that we don't like anymore, then I officially disown whatever that program was.
Well, and I like the idea of defining it as schools that fit a certain, you know, whatever, so that descriptor as opposed to naming buildings,
Mhm.
because, you know, if things change, then composition of those buildings could change, and we would want to recommend that whoever, you know, whatever districts result are doing this in high need schools specifically, so whatever those look like now versus what those look like 5 years from now.
So it should be a part of their, um, what is it, their eligible criteria?
Something like that, right?
Right, so then you make a journal and it stays there the same until we said the it does not.
Hey, Tizzy and Matt, can I ask a question? If not, that's okay. I don't want to interrupt a committee member.
No.
Um,
No,
is that okay?
yeah.
I was just gonna provide two thoughts on the conversation. One, I think like the high level overview of the students we're serving should be based on what Reading's ultimate charge is, like, you know, from the legislation, which is students in Wilmington and Northern Newcastle County, and focus on public schools, so traditional and charter and VOTEC. So that's sort of like, you know, the umbrella, and then we can zoom in, like we were talking about maybe highest need schools or students. And then another thing about sort of defining that potential threshold for maybe what schools we look at for out of school time services. Two ideas we could look at what we did we did a similar threshold for the educators work group with the I forget if it was the scholarships or the other program, but looking identifying those schools for the scholarships. It was a I believe students in poverty threshold, so we could you know not start from zero. We could look at something like that potentially to sort of define the radius. Um, and also we could look at any outcomes that are starting to develop from the wraparound service grants that have been provided to the three schools, and just see if there's any early sort of learnings there as well. So those are all my thoughts, just sharing. Thanks.
Yeah, thank you. Yeah, there's our Reading Consortium school list. Getting shared. Thanks, Elena.
Yeah.
But I mean, I think what I think sort of harken back to what we were saying, I think if we're making a recommendation for a district that is beyond the city of Wilmington, which it will be, right? I think to me, in the spirit of this is about elevating for everyone, makes sense to do it in a way that it cuts beyond just the borders of Wilmington.
Yeah, and I mean, just to give you some more concrete, I just punched up the list of current high need schools, just to give you a little bit more concrete in terms of schools that would be outside the city. It includes Brookside Elementary, Glasgow High School. Was Harlan in the city?
Yeah.
Okay. and I mean, I know it's near, I wasn't sure if it was within the city limits.
Mhm.
And I know there's a couple colonial schools on the list also, McCullough, Newcastle Elementary, Eisenberg. So, I mean, I think folks kind of know, which schools have high populations of, kids that are below the poverty line. So it's some schools that are current Reading schools, but, just some of the ones that I just
There may be
mentioned
some
are
additional.
not.
Mhm.
Yeah.
Yeah,
But they do serve Wilmington students.
they
Yeah.
currently do. Yeah, and to me, that's the distinction. I guess I don't even know what, and we probably should come up with solid terminology. When I think about the redistricting options, we sort of talk about like the receiving district, whether that's, or sort of the river plan version or like the consolidation options. Whoever ends up with Wilmington is sort of considered this receiving district. To me, that's that is the space where you would want to be focusing these recommended reforms, whether that's just those district sharing in a river plan, or that's all of northern Newcastle County. I think whoever is the resulting district that is serving Wilmington is where we would want to focus the investment. I don't know, that's my.
But Tizzy, the schools that Matt just named though,
Yeah.
they don't serve Wilmington students. So those would be, well, Glasgow probably does, but like those colonial schools like Eisenberg and stuff. So, but those would be incorporated in if the northern Newcastle County was selected. Is that what
I
you're
think
saying?
so. Yes, because then they're part of a district that serves Wilmington.
Okay.
Right? That's my rationale, and that does not the final word. This is just my personal opinion on what the scope should be.
Ultimately, what we're trying to prevent is a situation where we redistrict and then students don't have access to outside school time, right?
Mhm.
Because of proximity, because of transportation, so we're trying to prevent that from happening. So I just think about like when I was growing up in the Cesar Rodney School District, we had there was a community center in our neighborhood, and like the 4-H club came there.
Mhm.
So we would come from school but we would go to the community center for our OST,
Mhm.
that
Mhm.
type of thing. So
Mhm.
ultimately, what are we trying to prevent? We're trying to prevent that access to these programs, because now the lines have been redrawn. And so now, in order for my child to get these services, I now need to pick them up or take them across town. So we're trying to create more of these hubs.
Mhm.
So I think even outside of the schools, it's also the community centers, it's the Y, it's
Yeah.
all of those, sort of creating a network
Mhm.
of places. And I don't know, we can't coordinate that as the Reading Consortium, but what
Can we?
I
I don't know. Should we be talking about that? 'Cause
I can say, because if we start thinking about, because when Pacey start thinking about is like, okay, so when we talk about redistricting, right? So as educators, we don't think about the extra stuff you may need to redistrict. I mean, like housing, and how does that affect housing? How does that affect the after school programs or the community centers, right? Like, so if your child is already going to the Y, and that's the best place for you to pick, the most convenient place for your family, then, and if the Y doesn't have aftercare, constructive aftercare that has licensed, educators, why won't we support that?
Right, like not have it be limited to school-based, like
Yeah.
how do you, well, so how
like
do
the
you?
health center,
Yeah.
there's so many that are
Boys
in
and
that.
girls clubs,
Yep.
I mean, I know they
Mhm.
do a lot of school site-based too, but
Mhm.
like, how do you?
You got daycares that
Support
just,
that
that
mix.
do a lot of extended aftercare. They do till 8 o'clock at night. And they don't always have the correct people to do it, and we can support them in that way. Because everybody doesn't stay aftercare at their school.
Right,
Mhm.
Right, like you said, it's inconvenient. If they're
Mhm.
already busing, I don't have a ride to get them to school, they're already busing. When I could pick them up from the nearest community centers, then, I think we should support them.
I do see that Thomas Wallace is online, so Thomas, do you have any thoughts from the YMCA perspective? They would be welcome. no pressure, but I don't know if you heard what we were just saying. We're sort of talking about that community-based organization factor. And how that fits into this conversation. Because I feel like historically, we've just really focused on school-based delivery. Because it's
I think
easier.
we all, so sorry, Thomas, before you chime in, if you do, I think another important consideration in that too is that often, like when the YMCA's come to after school to the school to do the after school, or even the Boys and Girls Club, sometimes not all students are necessarily welcome, or the people or programming appropriate for all students. So also keeping that in mind specifically with students with like disabilities, and if you start to creating all these hubs, they should also be having access to it in appropriate care as well. Sorry, go ahead, Thomas.
No, I'm sorry. I caught the back end of the conversation. I was ending a phone call, so I didn't get all of the context of what was being mentioned. I did hear wraparound services and resources being considered specifically for after school care.
Yeah, I guess because we're trying to think about what recommendations to make for the delivery of outside of school time services in a variety of ways. But I think one thing that Margie just surfaced was that there's like there are and Kendra too, community-based options. And I think the work that Reading has done before has been very focused on supporting a school in delivering on-site programming. And I guess if we're making a broader recommendation to support outside of school time supports for students, any thoughts from like the YMCA perspective of what's working, what's not working? I don't know. Just it's pretty open-ended. We were really just starting to bring that piece into it.
That that's really interesting. I'm sorry.
Yeah. No. Go ahead.
No, I was going to say that's really interesting, and we're actually working intentionally with a group of partners now to identify how do we work more cohesively in creating a pipeline of services eligible to all of the students we're serving in our in particular areas. So I can have this as a takeaway for homework and report back. And we have a meeting coming up fairly soon with that consortium of individuals. So.
Yeah, I would say one thing to consider that I think was where we started kind of in our conversation was this idea of like we have a goal of outside of school time services supporting like academic outcomes, for example. We were talking about there being like certified educators in these spaces. And I guess I would love to know, what does that look like at a community-based organization in terms of qualified staff to support those types of outcomes? I think is a question it would be nice to be able to answer. So anything you have on that would be interesting.
Yes. I could bring that back to the table.
So I was thinking about like what could we then hand off to the finance group to then let them crunch the numbers, right? So ultimately, are we trying to figure out a dollar amount per student? So we're sort of backing into a funding model, right? So based on certain criteria, and so you talked about like how we define high needs based school, well, a high needs based student, then do we qualify that by saying, well, then there's certain funding that we want to attach to that student? So based on how this redistricting works, if those students, come from Wilmington areas and have certain criteria, then there's certain funding that should be applied to that student. So then the new school, the new district now has that funding to now put into the programming, because every school in the district has some type of after school programming, right? So some of them may be like, we're just going to roll them into our current program. We're not going to create anything new. For others, it may be, well, we're going to replicate what we have, but now we're going to create another satellite location in the city to make it more convenient for families that we're acquiring. But either way, there's got to be a price tag. There's got to be a funding that follows.
I can give you.
Contract with a community-based organization.
Yeah, exactly. However you do it internally or you can contract.
But that's the LAA's choice to make with
Yes.
those dollars that are attached to OSC.
Yeah.
Interesting.
And I think it's good too that it's for each per child, because then once the data I think we'll notice that the data shows a lot of our children are considered special needs already. So then they already get the funding already comes with them. And so that may be a way to trying to cut good or bad. And with that said, us putting a focus on special needs when it comes to redistribution, when it comes to funding, when it comes to us just doing what we're doing right now. Because we're gonna find that there's a percentage, at least over 20% of the kids and the data that we have are special needs, have special needs services. So like Tika said, when we talk about sending them places, having the correct people to educate them or support them is gonna be not an issue, but a big consideration.
Just to put it out there, thinking about what you need to send to the finance committee, Margie, I think identifying a dollar amount per student
Yeah.
is a really helpful idea to consider, because then you can look at what's the population of students we want to serve, whether it's in the city of Wilmington, whether it's Greater Newcastle County. We can easily pull that population data and multiply it by per dollar amount. Thinking about what kind of teachers you need and what kind of certifications you want to require, and do you want to have scholarships for continued education? Do you want to have deeper payments? Do you want to have stipends that support teachers offering these services outside of school time? Think about like what you actually want to require from this program. And then I think the finance committee could either attach a dollar figure to it or come up with a goal that the finance committee can work off of. I'm just thinking selfishly because
Yeah,
I
yeah.
have these conversations in like 2 months. So
Yes.
what would be helpful for me to know is just what your expectations are and how you actually want to operationalize that.
Maybe to help you, the Wilmington Collaborative is helping Brandywine with this. And I don't know if you can survey parents, but I think one of the biggest obstacles is sometimes transportation.
Oh, yeah.
We have a lot of our city kids outside the city limits. And we have their programs, but we don't have even buses. And that has got to be,
Yeah.
I'm not officially on the committee, but I'm a part of other committees, but
You're welcome
anything,
here.
you know, Brady, we can do to help on that, is to contact us, but we are working with Wilmington Collaborative, that summer programs at Harlem.
Yeah.
And they
And
can probably
this-
give you a per pupil.
Yeah,
cost.
the transportation formula won't provide funding for that.
No.
So you have to think about.
That needs to be broken.
But that's it, but no, but
No,
that's,
yeah.
but for the purposes of this conversation,
Yeah.
right? I mean, that, assuming nothing changes in the rest of the formula, which may or may not
Oh, we can make
happen, but
recommendations.
assuming no changes, then you need to consider what it would take to transport.
But this is separate from the transportation formula. 'Cause
Exactly.
So I sort of equate it to how we handle special education students. So when a student qualifies for extended school year, then part of the funding is for transportation. But on the flip side of that, the issue that was just brought up, we have the other issue, many schools have the other issue where a student qualifies for extended school year, we provide transportation door to door, and the family still doesn't participate,
sure.
right? So that's the other side as well. So it's not as if we're just going to throw money at it, but there's got to be a partnership, and we got to be sure that that child is getting the services,
Right.
that we're not just throwing money at it. But you have
Yeah.
to consider that part. Because it is, I mean, it's frustrating when you have the situation where the bus is coming, all you got to do is dress your child and put them on the bus and let us take care of them for that extended amount of time. And for whatever reason, they choose not to participate.
Yeah.
So there's got to be the family engagement piece.
Questions in the chat.
Yeah, there's
So
some
for-
good comments in the chat that we are capturing, right? Good.
Do you want folks to, I guess?
We're also gonna have, I mean, we have a public comment period also before and I mean, you wanna just like stop and do that now, just so that,
You're,
well, no, why don't we do that? I mean, that's actually could potentially be helpful.
I think, can we answer, were you looking to answer some of these questions?
oh, yeah.
I said promotes inclusion.
Promotes
Yeah.
inclusion, yeah.
Yeah, why don't we just, and you know what, it's a small enough group that we can have public comment now, and if we decided after we close public comment that we wanted to have public comment again, we can
Do whatever.
do
we want.
that, yeah.
Cool.
So, Elena, I don't know how you,
Yeah, so it's usually 2 minutes per person, 3 minutes per organization. It looks like Bill Doolittle has his hand raised.
okay,
You want me just to start? You want me to just start?
Yeah.
Okay. I just had a couple things to offer. One is that there is an extended learning opportunity subcommittee of the IRMC that works on these issues. So they might be a good resource from you. They tend to lean towards the community provider, whether in school or in community settings. So it might be worth reaching out to them. A lot of work on best practice are sort of charged legislatively with that area. Second is that purchase of care. There was in the last year a major upgrade to purchase of care around students with disabilities. It used to be the difference in funding was de minimis, and now it's quite substantial. So particularly as you kick it over to the finance committee, understanding where that landscape is now, and it is sort of an open set of work. We sort of set a standards to it, and they may grow as we better define the needs. The other thing is I actually served on the extended learning subcommittee, and in my research, the one thing I found that best practice wise is individualizing the instruction creates some of the best results. So it's actually directed at the child's needs, just rather than a generic academic support system. And that applies both to before and after school and extended learning in the summer and vacations. So just a few thoughts. Thanks.
Before we move up, Bill, what did you say the subcommittee of the IRMC?
ELC.
ELC, Extended Learning?
Extended Learning Committee.
ELOS, Extended Learning Opportunity Subcommittee of RMC.
Yeah.
I just got appointed to that group and we're meeting next week, so ask about that.
Thank you. Next is Monica Moria.
Hello, thank you. I love hearing you guys talk and brainstorm because really it is complicated, but maybe there are simpler programs. One of the things because I agree with, we have a variety of after school programs. Parents need them in different locations. Students want to be in different locations. Different things work for different families, and some of them are great with enrichment, right? And it might be that we just need to showcase parents. Maybe there's an opportunity for at some point parents to move kids from one to the other because it's different, almost like camps, but they're after school programs and they sign up for 6 weeks, 9 weeks and work with the providers around would that work for them from a programming standpoint. But I wondered about layering an instructional piece on top of that. So from a tutoring, we've had that individual tutoring, maybe a group of 2 or 3 who are in an area or where we send tutors and people who can be tutors, and that could be college students who are specialing in something, people with master's degrees who are specialing, retired teachers, maybe who would like to take something on once a week or something, where they would go to the local Y, they would go to a United Way location, the Boys and Girls Club, for a 30-minute session or something, and thinking about what that transportation looks like. But maybe this brings that instructional piece because we do know we need to fill in gaps for students, and students with or without gaps, no matter what their family situations or their struggles or non-struggles are, students of all ages could use some extra support sometimes in areas, and teachers are more than capable of identifying that. So I wonder if that's a thought to layer something on top that would then find the student in an area, especially in Wilmington where things tend to be closer together. But thank you.
Anybody's got their hand up? Elaine?
No other hands are raised. I know that there were also some comments in the chat. I don't know if any of the folks wanted to come offline and share their comments, but that's it for everyone who's like us.
I don't know enough about the United Way program, but I know that I recently got a request for data sharing, which I think is promising, right? So when a program provider is looking for a data sharing agreement, then obviously they want to be held accountable to outcomes. So they want to be able to track, these are the students coming from this school, and then this is how we can provide them service. So in the data sharing, they would be able to then see the students' state assessment scores, so that they can personalize the support that they give. I don't know of, I haven't received that request from any other provider, so I wonder if that needs to be a component. Like how do you raise the level, the standard of the programming? Well, there would need to be data sharing. There would need to be some way of providing that information to them so that they know this child needs support in math versus literacy versus whatever.
Based off of, what Margie just said, and then something that Bill just shared about individualized learning, it made me curious about something I read in the materials that Elena sent. And I think it was the Christina School District's proposal. And they mentioned they were doing these like assessments and mapping profiles of learning for kids. Do we have any data back on how that went? Was that completed?
Nothing in what was provided to us by the Department of Education, which is, you saw one of the questions on the agenda is what type of quality control and oversight from the state should be required. And I think that's someplace where we have fallen short. We at the state, not the Reading Consortium,
Right,
but
yeah.
the state has fallen short because Tika, you're right. We for the 3 programs that are funded by the state based on our recommendations, there are all sorts of requirements in the RFP that went out for those programs and in the bids that the programs put in, which is what you are referring to, about all kinds of data that they were going to collect on an ongoing basis about students to chart their progress. And as best I can tell, none of it, if it is being collected by the state, it's certainly not being included in any of the materials that the state's putting out, tracking the progress of those programs. There's nothing in anything that the state sent us that would tell you if kids in the Christina program are doing better or worse academically as a result of the programming that they're getting. So I think that's, to me at least, a given that any new programs that we start would have to have much more specific requirements for the state. I'm not sure it's even the school's fault. I think that the problem is that the state is not requesting the information.
Well, and I think it then becomes kind of a combination too, because those impact statements will be important, but when people don't ask, sometimes you tend not to always necessarily follow through and do. And I can't speak to all 3 of them, but in conversations, at least about one of the programs with colleagues, from what I read, a lot of that's not necessarily even happening. So I think that would be an important consideration to put in there with those requirements, or what that is going to look like and how they will share out their reporting and identify their outcomes.
So what I would like to suggest, just for purposes of having something that people can respond to and either agree with or disagree with, but just try to, because, ultimately we're trying to come up with something to turn over to the committee. So I will just sort of put this out there as a starting place and people can have at it. But, I would suggest that we use the 28 schools of the 31 that are Northern Newcastle County schools on the Department of Education's high needs school list as the outside limits of what we asked the finance committee to give us cost estimates for. What I would suggest that we do, this goes to Nick's point of needing to give them something to work off of. If we are going to suggest that using certified teachers be part of what we are requiring as part of these programs, I would suggest that we ask them to have a ratio, a teacher to student rate, come up with an estimate that's based on a teacher to student ratio, and that ratio might be different for students with IEPs than other students. And it will probably also be different for elementary versus middle school versus high school. And I don't know those numbers sitting here, but I'm pretty confident that there are there are sort of uniformly accepted teacher to student ratio numbers for all those different categories. And that transportation costs at the end, either getting to school for a before school program or home from school for an after school program, that would also be part of what would need to be costed out. And we can do that. All the 3 Reading programs all provide transportation after and all have budgets for it. And what am I leaving out? And finally, there likely needs to be some, aside from teachers and probably one person staffing the program who is not a teacher. There probably also needs to be some type of supervision of the program aside from the folks providing the services. And I don't know that every school necessarily needs a full-time person doing that. I could foresee one person doing that for multiple schools, but some type of administrative person who would oversee the programs, be responsible for gathering evaluation data and budgets and the like. So I put all that out there just to have something that, is on the table for people to react to. But I think that's something that if we sent it to the finance committee, they can figure out, what do you need to pay someone for X? What do you need to pay someone for Y? And they could kind of build, what does it cost to have transportation for X number of students? So it's at least something that they could build a cost estimate off of. And similarly, it's something that we could put in front of the community at community engagement committee meetings and get some focused feedback to. So I throw all that out there and for people's reactions.
I think just as important as having a certified teacher, if maybe not a little bit more important, is individuals that are culturally competent, that are able to manage different student behaviors, have backgrounds in de-escalation techniques, because especially if you were looking for something that had, like a scripted curriculum or whatever, I could be a certified teacher, but if I'm not comfortable working with certain populations, or if I don't have a background in certain things, or even being knowledgeable about restorative practices or trauma-informed practices, then I might not be the best fit for this student or this group of students, but I might be great for another group of students and vice versa. So I think there's some other considerations that, along with if you're looking at a certified teacher, I think being able, especially when the student behavior is such a large conversation right now, I think that's a very important consideration.
Is there some existing I mean, I think that sounds great, but I guess I'm wondering if there's like some existing type of certification that speaks to those types of skill sets. There's not, right?
Well, so
like, how would you require there to be someone who is X? There has to be some.
So I mean, you can
I
add
might
the orientation. So the orientation of the employees, the training,
Okay.
should include these pieces. I think, to Tika's point.
Did you hear that, Chika? So since it's not like there's some common certification where we can say you need a person who has X, it's more about how do you actually train.
Sure.
It may be sort of an individual serving in like a para capacity.
Like a 1 hour.
It's not necessarily a certification as much as it's a skill. And like probably the easiest way for me to refer it back to is the MTSS chart. And so there's the social emotional one, and then there's the one for the academic.
So like the social emotional side of the MTSS?
Yes, that like the state uses.
Interesting.
I was gonna say, it looks like both, Jim Simmons and Rachel Zamford added some comments in the chat too.
I was wondering
I
who
know
that
Judgment
James
Day
was. Now we know.
To share anything?
This is maybe not setting a good precedent, but there's so few people in this meeting. I'm
should speak
I'm
for
fine
you.
with, kind of merging the public comment with the rest of it. So if people
Great.
who are not members of the committee wanted to raise their hands and chime in, I think that's fine, not only fine, but helpful. Or yes, or
He
those who
didn't, yeah.
engage in self-help. Yeah.
Or not, you don't have to. We'll still capture those comments.
I mean, I don't know that it warrants me reigning, and I did realize that I had James's iPad, and folks didn't realize who it was, so I did change it. I think that I think all the comments have really been spot on. I think you just have to be mindful that when you have out of school time, it's an enrichment on top of things, and so I think to tie in what I heard was, I don't know how you could even begin to do that without incorporating our community-based organizations and those other organizations that are sometimes providing it. And so by making it an add-on or adding enrichment to what they're doing, I think that limits the necessity to have certified teachers that we know we've struggled to get to do at certain levels, whether it was the summer or certainly after school when they put in long days and long time. And I would also add, sometimes those students just need a break from those teachers and each other, right? And so I think we've got to be mindful of the whole picture. But I liken it to, it takes a community to raise, but it also takes a community to educate. And so when we talk about those outside agencies, it includes our churches and those other places where we have trusted messengers to get this value of education up and running. And so again, I've heard everybody has said it multiple different ways, but I just wanted to tie in why I made some of those comments.
Yeah, and my suggestion would be in terms of, community-based organizations. I mean, for purposes of us sending something to the finance committee, I mean, my suggestion would be that we be, am I using agnostic the right way? I think I am. I mean, that the school would get a budget, and if they want to do the program at the school, they can do that. If they want to do it someplace else, they can do that, and they can make a judgment about, what works best for their families. I mean, my own personal experience, especially with elementary school age students, is that a lot of the parents don't like their kids moving around more than they have to during the day. So they might prefer, to stay in the same building, but that's just me. And there may be schools where, it would work better someplace else because cost reasons of keeping the building open or, what have you. So my suggestion would be that we, not try to dictate the physical location, but just, come up with a number.
Yeah, figure out what the number is for resources, figure out what the right guardrails are.
There's one question on here that we may have implicitly answered, which was when we did the Reading programs, the way that unfolded was that we had folks involved in Reading who also were very focused on student health centers. And so the way that the three current programs that have state funds, I try to not call them Reading funded programs because we don't fund them directly and we don't run them. So I call them state programs that are funded with funds recommended by Reading.
That's it.
Those programs were all required to include student health center programs as part of their proposal. And those ended up, they're not inexpensive. And, they've, in some cases, I think if they're not the majority of the funds, they're pretty substantial part of the funds. So, I mean, and now we're talking about doing something potentially for not just 3 schools, but, potentially dozens of schools. So my suggestion, at least along the same lines of focusing on academics, is that we not try to also, cover the whole student health center waterfront at the same time. But I had it listed on here as a question.
I mean, I think we all agree it's important, and we've definitely gotten at that in our work through Reading, but it does feel separate from what we're all talking about right now.
Yeah.
Does that need to be a separate recommendation that we're not?
No, I think it's, I mean, I think that, no, I think it's implied if, I mean, if what we're sending is
Yeah.
limited, I think that it implies the answer to that
And I
question.
think the LEA can decide, right? So if we stick to a funding model, then the
Mhm.
LEA can decide whether they already have the wellness center that they can tap into. Maybe they just need to expand it a little bit more, or maybe they need another site, but that's, the LEA can
You
decide.
feel like saying these resources should be able to be utilized for wellness center supports as well? Like if we were to, is that what, sorry, is that what you're saying?
Yeah, I think the wellness center piece, I don't think needs to be included
Oh,
as
okay.
part of the
Got it.
grant. The,
Right.
yeah, the schools will decide whether or not they can tap into
Yeah.
that.
Okay.
Yeah, but I think that what we ultimately recommend, I mean, I would envision us recommending a budget that would pretty much only cover the academic part of it and the support that would go with, I mean, again, I know less about how the
Yeah.
mechanics of this than anybody sitting at this table, but the way that I would picture this looking is you have a room that has some certified teachers in it and, or rooms, depending on how many students, some certified teachers and also some folks who aren't necessarily certified teachers, but who are providing support for the teachers. Like, I don't think every single
Bring
person
other skill
working for the
sets into the
program.
room.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But that's what the money would be for and not for
Not for wellness.
a student health center expansion or.
No,
Yeah.
I realize that, but let me give you another scenario that pops in my head is that if I have the students in my building and I see that a portion of those students need eye exams, then I have that service in the wellness center, then I want to bring those people over to do eye exams of the students.
So during.
So, yeah, like I have them in my building, so if I can do eye checks and do eye exams to see if they need glasses, if they provide dental services, if they provide, I don't know, sports physicals, I mean, whatever can be done to alleviate that pressure off of the families to have to do it outside of school time.
Mhm.
I mean, I would encourage that.
Sure.
I'm not saying that we should give funding to build more wellness centers,
I got
but wellness programming and servicing can be overlapped and
Mhm.
intermingled with the OSTs.
Sure.
Okay.
Yeah.
Margie, another example I think I thought of was like athletic trainers. So I don't know that all schools have athletic trainers, but maybe that's the school, if it's their after school program that they didn't, maybe that was something they wanted.
Yeah.
I see Haley's question in the chat about creating a new, I don't think, I think to Matt's previous point, I think we're talking about making sure there's adequate resources for LEAs to make those decisions. So if they need a new program and this gives them the resources to do that, that would be their choice. But I don't think we're trying to compel people to scrap what they're doing and start fresh unless that's what they need to do.
I think that we want to require a focus on
Yeah.
academics, certified teachers and in proper curriculum. But beyond that, I don't think.
We're done.
And the reason I say that is that our outcomes with our existing programs in terms of GPA change,
Just looking at that.
improvement in reading and math are not good compared to other states.
How out of step are we with what other states are doing? Because I see it's like half the kids are showing improvement, and doesn't even say how much improvement. So it could be.
Well, I mean, that's part of the problem is that we don't even, like for standardized tests, I'll just use Pennsylvania just because it's right next door. The way that they measure improvement on standardized tests for their federally funded after school programs is if a student actually moves an entire category over the course of a
that's
year. It
improvement.
moves
Okay.
from, what's the one below proficient? I can't remember.
Well, it's 1 through 4.
Yeah,
It's a
so
1 through
yeah.
4 scale.
Yeah,
Yeah.
so they-
So it'd
so-
be a 2.
Yeah, in Pennsylvania, they actually measured, did they jump a category? And they don't have, I mean, the majority of the kids don't jump a whole category,
Yeah.
but they at least measure, that's how they measure it. In Delaware, we just measure, did the raw score improve from one year to the next, which,
Oh,
No,
that's how we do it?
yeah, that's how we measure for our.
no, we
after
just
schools.
measure the students that achieve a 3 or 4.
Oh,
That's it.
No, for the federal after-school programs,
Oh, okay.
the way that we generate the reports, because and it was one of the things that we just, the latest one, I can't remember the year of it is, but we have to tell the federal government, how are we measuring for the federally funded programs? And there's a lot more federally funded programs than there are Reading type programs. How do you measure test score improvements? And it's just
The
the
raw
score went up.
score, the
Yeah.
raw score change.
Yeah,
Okay.
which doesn't necessarily, and it could go up by,
Yeah, I was
One
gonna say,
point.
we don't know.
Because there's growth targets created, established based on the raw score.
right.
That's the part that the public doesn't always see, right? But the LEAs, we know that. And so we're monitoring our student growth.
Right.
Because they've been
Mm.
given a target that their
Mhm.
raw score would go from this in third grade to this in fourth grade.
Mhm.
It doesn't mean that they necessarily become proficient, but they have a growth score. And so that's the part that we don't publicize, is what percentage of our students achieve their growth
Well,
target.
I guess I wonder, like, I get, how do I articulate this? So I think, we don't want to be prescriptive, as we've been very clear, we don't want to be prescriptive with the LAs about what they're doing, but we do want there to be that sort of accountability factor that we're investing in effective programming. So I think we're starting to maybe get it, but what is an appropriate way to measure that? It seems like we're not necessarily measuring things in a way that we feel is telling us much by looking at raw test scores. Attendance numbers look good, not from what I'm looking at in the sheet, and engagement and learning, I'm not sure what metrics,
that's sort of
Feedback.
that's
survey data.
like teacher
Okay.
survey, which is,
That's, something.
I think the growth target should be
The
one.
growth target,
Mhm.
I mean, that is, yeah, I'd love to talk more about that, or I guess, so it's like, that's something that a school would have for that child regardless, and then it's sort of being able to see if that student is meeting their
Yeah.
growth targets.
So the growth target takes into account where the student is at. So if the student's
Yeah.
raw score puts them at a low 1 range.
Yeah,
And their growth target may be to get to a high 1 range.
yeah,
So not proficient,
yeah,
but we made growth in just that 1 range. And then the next year it may be to get into the 2 range,
Yeah.
So
Right.
it needs to be part of it.
We said about three answers, they already answered that question. What do we want our outcomes to be of a wraparound, of the wraparound services that we're supporting? Like, is it to get them to a tier 4, a level 4? Do we want a certain percentage to be on a certain level by a certain amount of time, or, do we have a timeline?
I mean, if
Like,
I was
what
trying to
do we
measure,
want our outcome to be?
I mean, and again, I'm, sort of, this is off the top of my head. Not every kid in every school is going to participate in the outside school time program. So
Right.
what I would want to see is that kids
In-
who participate
Yeah.
in the outside school time program have more growth than kids who don't.
yeah,
I mean, that's what's telling me that the outside school time part of and it's not perfect because there's some self-selection, and maybe the parents who have their kids go to the program are also helping them more at home. I mean,
sure,
it's not perfect, but that, at least as like a rough,
Yeah,
measure, seems like it makes sense. Is this actually,
but you need a control group. So
Yeah.
the group, what was their level of growth based on this group, the group that didn't go
right?
to the services?
yeah,
That's a good
Growth
Ms.
target.
Brady said, should be growth targets moving to proficiency.
Yeah.
Who crunches those numbers? I mean, that's something that lives in the system at the school level, what the growth targets are for that student, right? So then it's just a matter of someone being able to parse out this student is attached to this program.
Yeah, so I was thinking about the accountability part. So, the world that I live in is like, when I think about the opportunity funding, when that came out, it was to be held, you're held accountable for that funding. So every year we have to report to the Department of Education to say, this is the money you gave us for the opportunity funding. This is what we used it for. And these are some of the outcomes. And we get to show them what our outcomes is. Now that's a discussion. If the Department of Education doesn't like what we've selected as outcomes, they can come back at us to say, well, we'd rather that you add this or that. But it is a conversation at the beginning. But ultimately, every year we've got to report to them to show them that we're making good use of that money. So when we think about like, what's the level of quality control and oversight, I'm thinking of something similar to that, where you get the funding for 1 year, but then at the end of the year, you've got to show what your outcomes are. And then the Department of Education has, or whoever it is, has then the option whether or not they want to cut the funding or stop the funding or increase the funding, whatever the case may be. But every school should, or every district or charter should be held responsible for, this is, we're making good use of the money and this is what we're using it for. I mean, we have to do that with all of our funders, 21st Century, every funder, Longwood Foundation, they don't give you money and not expect outcomes.
Right. So what the first thing we ask is we have to ask ourselves, what are the outcomes we want? And that should be a criteria with whoever we work with is you have to be able to produce these outcomes in the timeline that we asked for.
Well, I guess I would ask then what happens if that's not happening? Because I guess what we're talking about is making sure there's certain resources geared towards certain students. So the punishment isn't going to be to take the resources away. So then what is the accountability to make sure that those resources are being matched to the most effective programming? Like what is, what is that part of the accountability question? If we're looking at growth and if people are consistently, having these sets of students in a specific program and they're not meeting growth targets, is that something where the department says you're gonna have to change program? Like what happens?
But at least it forces a conversation.
Yeah.
Yeah, we wouldn't want them to just cut but there's
Not
gotta
the
be,
funds
but
or-
there's gotta be accountability. So
Or
whether,
lunch changes for the kids, like, again,
Yeah.
What is it that you need to
exactly,
meet the outcome? Like, you can use that data to help support whatever is the barrier that is going on for you not to meet that outcome.
but
Not
ultimately,
necessarily- Right, not saying we want to cut you off, but we
Yeah.
can use that to help better you and uplift you to see what it is that we can do to help,
Yeah.
get to
Well,
that
and it's-
outcome. Ultimately, we want that outcome.
sure.
We don't want to put nobody out, but we do want to be very transparent about the outcome that is expected.
Yeah.
Because if we don't show high expectation and we don't crack down on expectation and transparency, then we just fall in the category of everybody else.
Well, and
Yeah.
could part of that consequence sort of be sort of like when, schools aren't meeting their compliance stuff. And so then they're put on like improvement plans and whatever their SIP plan is or something. So maybe it was something like now we do site visits or something because of the reporting is not being done.
Mm.
Bill Doolittle has his hands.
Oh. Yeah, Bill.
Yeah, I agree fully that growth modeling is by far the best way to evaluate. I'd use real caution in using Delaware's current system because it's all based on at or near grade band increases. And some of our kids may be far enough off of grade band that they don't pick up as growth in our current modeling system.
Unfortunately, Bill, it's the only thing we have. Like, we're not gonna create a whole separate growth target system. So I hear you.
Ray saying, sorry, go ahead.
I do say that we could very easily change to the aggregated interim system in our current assessment system. And Delaware's just chosen not to. In that case, you can go off grade band and actually measure growth. It's just Delaware is just doing what's easiest right now.
Yeah.
Well, and if a school doesn't have the growth that the other schools are having, and we look at, I mean, to Bill's point, if we look at, why is this happening, and we find out that a much higher percentage of students in that school's program have significant enough disabilities that they're not really amenable to the what do we call the state test now?
Yeah.
I'm a little,
Yeah.
starter balance. Sorry, I've been through 4 or 5 of them.
It was the decaf. Oh my God. That's been a while.
So I think there, that would be, I mean, for me, if I saw that there were, that most of the schools were hitting growth targets and that there were a couple who weren't, that's one of the first questions
Sure.
I would ask is, what's the makeup of the students in the program?
Ray made a comment in the chat that schools must show progress even if growth targets are maybe lagging.
I mean, those can be separate metrics, right? Like
Mhm.
progress shown versus
Yeah.
targets met. I mean, those are,
Well,
Those are
that's
two-
why it's important that you shouldn't just have one metric.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's not like one and done. I
Yeah.
mean, so there should be multiple metrics. There should be attendance. There should be
I like
participation.
attendance.
There should be growth, so
Yeah.
you can see all of it. And it's possible that they may not hit in one metric, but the others are strong. But I think it's just healthy to have that conversation
Mhm.
so that if you find that this program, they seem to be doing all the right things, but they're not getting the outcomes we asked for, then as a Department of Education, then maybe we need to look at giving them additional resources or changing things or suggesting things or benchmarking with another program that's comparable, that's getting better outcomes. But ultimately, the worst case scenario is that we put money into this, and then to your point, the control group, if this group that's getting all of this funding and OST services don't outperform their peer group that aren't participating in that, that's an issue. Because now that we got to answer to the taxpayers and the public. They're like, well, why are we spending all that money? You're not giving me any better outcomes. So
That's a legit issue. if it's happening,
exactly.
And we should have to answer.
Yeah.
Yeah.
With 21st century, are those like proposals that the LEA has to vet through DOE? Like, does DOE have to vet their proposals and approve them and
The
review them?
21st
Yeah,
century,
is that how it
DOE
is?
has their hand in it,
Okay.
yes.
Okay.
I think, doesn't DOE make the awards?
I think all the federal money flows through DOE.
Okay, so
yeah,
they're
DOE actually-
reviewing sort of applications that say what you're gonna do and they have to approve that.
Yeah,
before
we've
the
never
funds
qualified, so
flow.
I haven't gone
Okay,
through the
okay.
process, but it starts with DOE.
Okay.
Mhm.
So it's not like it's an absurd idea that DOE would be managing all of this, right? So approving what the money gets spent on and monitoring these things, this accountability piece.
How
It is
does
not
the University of Delaware fit into that?
Sorry, what was the question?
How does the University of Delaware fit into that? Because aren't
Oh.
they like University of Delaware 21st Learning Centers or something like that?
I think the state has outsourced to the
Oh.
University of Delaware the evaluation
Right,
of the 21st century programs.
that's the crest.
Oh,
that's what I'm
okay.
looking at.
Yeah.
So they're only involved from like an evaluator standpoint.
Right.
Got
They
it.
work with the department.
Yeah.
Mhm.
And there were, this is probably getting more into the weeds than we need to for purposes of our recommendations, but I think that there are some real issues, both in terms of the standards that we hold the programs to,
Mhm.
with the example that I gave being one of them, with 1 point increase,
Mhm.
being considered improvement.
Mhm.
Both the standards and then how diligent the department is about tracking that information and collecting it and using it. I think there's room for improvement on both fronts.
Mhm.
So I'm just thinking in terms of our process. And I think that we, at a minimum, are going to leave here today with a small amount of additional homework to do, which is trying to come up with these teacher to student and staff to student ratios. Because I think that's on us to deliver it that way to the finance committee. And I don't know that it's difficult to do. I just don't,
So they
we
can
can't
figure
do
out
it
cost
sitting
per
here,
student.
yeah. So I think that's in terms of like unknown information, the only unknown information. So I guess I would like to I threw a whole bunch of stuff out. And, made an open offer to people to add to it or,
Yeah.
or reject it. And it would be helpful to get some sense of what, should remain of that, because ideally what I would love to do is to come back at the beginning of our meeting next week, be able to plug in whatever, numbers we've come up with in the intervening week and vote on something to send off to the finance committee. So I guess I just sort of open it up to, in terms of and I'll take responsibility for, putting in some more coherent form, what I threw out. But in terms of what I was talking about, are there like additions or subtractions?
I mean, to me, it sounded reflective of what was kind of being brought up. So I don't know, unless you want to restate.
That was my goal.
Okay, yeah, it seemed to reflect where people's heads were going with this. So I didn't hear anything that seemed off track in terms of answering the questions in front of us.
And there'll be another shot. When we come back next week, it'll be on paper and
Yeah.
if somebody sees something and says, that's outrageous, there's still a chance to talk about it, but just for my own head, in terms of trying to write stuff down, I wanted to get a sense for that.
I'd be willing to talk to the folks at Harlan that are doing it. You sound like you're the gentleman who's helping with a lot of the numbers. Forget your email. I can email you at least. I can ask.
Yeah.
There was one question now that I'm thinking about it that occurred to me. So we're talking about across all grades. We're not talking about narrowing it just to elementary schoolers, right? That's what
I think we were
heard you
gonna
say.
ask them to give us both numbers.
Okay.
We were gonna ask them to give us a number just for elementary schools and then one for that would
Okay.
include middle and high school. I don't know that it's gonna be a huge difference just because I think so few of the schools on that list are middle and high
Yeah,
schools.
yeah. Got it.
And I think there's a couple schools on that list that are elementary and middle school age. Like isn't
Like schools that have both,
one of the Christina schools go K to 8?
1 to 8.
One
Two
to
of them
8.
go 1 to 8.
Yeah, so there's some schools where it's gonna be, both.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, for what you said sounded good to me. It will be really helpful to see it written down.
Spoken like a lawyer.
Not bad.
Well, and this is just another process question going forward. I mean, my intention had been to kind of try to follow the same methodology going forward. So sometime this week, you would get a similar type package of information that would talk about premium pay for teachers.
Next week?
Yeah. And that we would just try to get stuff out to people the week before. It's all, it all goes up on the website. It's all publicly available.
Good. We got a
and-
quality audience and set of participants too.
Yeah.
This is good.
And I wouldn't be surprised if future meetings ended like this one did, where we didn't get to item number 4, voting on everything, but we tried to, sort of go back and write it down.
I do got one thing to say, because it popped up in my journey of life this weekend, just to bring up when we talk about redistricting and thinking about things. We always talked about pay and pay scale, right? And when we talk about budgeting this thing, are we going to ask for more pay, higher pay when we redistrict? Just putting that out there as a question.
I'm looking at Stephanie.
I'm asking because I think I can speak from a person in the situation. You have to be in too long to make any money to support a family. And I think it's very, I don't even know the word, but it's very cool of us to ask educators to support other people's families, but we can't support our own. So in understanding that everybody needs right credentials, but I can just imagine coming out of college with debt, and I'm not making enough to not live in my parents' basement. Not alone being a mom or a wife or this has been a pillar of the community, like just keeping in mind that when we ask for higher expectations, that we are keeping the consideration of the low expectation and the low pay that we have in
For the educator.
Yes.
Amen, Kendra.
Yeah, there you go.
Cause it's hard. You have to be 10 years in to make any money. So, and then we tell people, when we tell our agency workers will go work for the district, when you talk about, when you sit down and calculate it, it makes no sense for you to work for the district at all. So just keep that in mind.
Thank you. All right. I think next week's gonna be lively.
Yeah, thank you. This is really helpful. And we will keep charging forward.
Awesome. Thank you, guys.
Thank
So actually, this was fun.
Yep, thank you. East Side Charter is not in the room, but thank you to them for
Yeah.
use their space.
Thanks, Eastside Charter.
And to those of you who might want to come to the next meeting in person, there's plenty of parking.
Plenty of
Yeah.
parking.
Yeah.
Water.
Thanks.